They didn't say they were God. They just had that title as an authority thing. Okay? Handed down to them from God, from their God, or gods. Finally, the religion of Mesopotamia represented a highly developed polytheism. The people believed that there were many gods, some of whom were males and some females. These gods represented the phases of nature, such as the sky, stars, storms, etc., and they were worshipped by the bringing of sacrifices. Religion in Mesopotamia was also anthropomorphic, because it was believed that the gods not only existed in the image of man, but also had human needs. For example, the gods and goddesses also were represented by human-shaped idols, and the priests who ministered in the temple would bring these human-like figures food and wine 3 times daily. At the head of the pantheon or organization of the gods was Enlil, lord of the storm, while the cults of the various gods were carried on in cities where it was believed that they had their seat, and where each god's prestige rose or fell with that of the city with which he was identified. The gods themselves were not conceived to be mere local gods. Their existence as well as their functions were recognized by all peoples of Mesopotamia. There was, however, an order among the gods, and frequently disputes ensued. Whenever a war broke out between the city-states, it was attributed to the fact that a legal battle also was going on in the state of the gods. The victory in battle of one city-state over another represented the endorsement of that city's claim for Enlil, the king of the gods. Calamity on earth also reflected the anger of the gods because of some affront. It was the function of the priests to serve the gods, to calm the gods in their anger, and thus maintain peace and stability. Because of the comparatively advanced stage of civilization found in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, it was inevitable that many wandering groups of people were attracted to the area from the South Hill country and the desert regions. Some came as invaders, others settled peacefully. Among the many people who settled in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley was a group of wandering tribes called Habiru. The Habiru actually were a mixed group made up of no one people. They represented a social class of semi-nomads who lived in Mesopotamia, but who were unable to become completely a part of an organized community. They would wander from one area to another, for example, settling in each one only temporarily. The Habiru would support themselves by pasturing their flocks, or by serving as skilled craftsmen, such as smiths and musicians. Blacksmiths and musicians, probably those who played harp and the flute and the pipes and stuff. So that would go through in the Bible. The Genesis account of those who were nomads, desert wanderers, had stock, and other ones like Tubal Cain that made tools, and the other ones that ended up making or becoming the forefathers of those who played the music, the harp and the pipes or the flute. The Habiru would support themselves by pasturing their flocks or by serving as skilled craftsmen such as smiths and musicians. They were not necessarily always peaceful in their activities. At times some of the Habiru would seek to make their living by raiding caravans and weak outlying communities, or by hiring themselves out as mercenaries. It is believed by many scholars that some of the Habiru were the early ancestors of the Jewish people. These scholars point, for example, to the similarity between the names of Habiru and Hebrew, Genesis 14:13. Moreover, archaeological evidence tells us that the Habiru tribes were living in the very regions and in the same period of time associated with Abraham. This fact, says the scholars, testifies further to the kinship between the people who are called the Habiru and the Hebrews. Not all the Habiru tribes, however, became part of the Jewish people. Some of the Habiru groups became ancestors of what came to be called many hundreds of years later the Arab people. Only those groups who moved ultimately into the land of Canaan, which is called today Israel and Palestine, and who associated themselves with the traditions of Abraham in Mesopotamia and later of Moses in Egypt, came to be regarded as the founders of the Jewish people. Three terms are used as names for the Jewish people. The earliest ancestors were called Hebrews, or the Awu. When the Hebrews under Moses, as we shall see, entered into a covenant or agreement with their God, Yahweh, they came to be called Israelites. The term Hebrew continued in use, however, being retained as a name by which the Israelites referred to themselves whenever they spoke with foreigners. The term Jewish people came into use during the Greek period following the conquest of Jerusalem by Alexander the Great in the year 332 b.c.e. The period of history connected with Abraham is known as a period of the patriarchs. A patriarch is a father, and the term applies to Abraham and his descendants, Isaac and Jacob, who, according to the tradition of the Bible, are considered to be the fathers of the founders of the Jewish people. The patriarchal period refers, however, in its broader sense to the period of Jewish history beginning with Abraham and continuing until the Hebrews began to live in Egypt. Well, they're actually there in the book of Brita, in the Aramaic of Genesis. Apashkad was the father of him. Noah came out of the ark, had the three sons, Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Japheth became known as the forefather of the Awu, or the Hebrews. And then Apashkad had a son called Eber, and from there on they were the Hebrews. So these peoples with Abraham, who was born in the Ur of Chaldee, ended up migrating to Canaan. They stopped off at Haran where Terah died for a while, then they finally went to Canaan. The patriarchal period refers, however, in its broader sense to the period of Jewish history beginning with Abraham and continuing until the Hebrews began to live in Egypt. Some scholars say that the age of the patriarchs lasted from 1850 to 1710 b.c.e. Others believe that it covered a longer period from approximately 2000 to 1720 b.c.e. When Abraham came upon the scene of history, the civilization of the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley already was in a state of decline. After nearly 1500 years of growth, Mesopotamian civilization had begun to decay because of the numerous invaders who gradually were able to overrun their country. As a result, many people began to move from place to place in search of better living conditions. This situation must have fashioned the pattern of Abraham's life. 2. It must be remembered that Abraham was a man of considerable wealth and prestige. Genesis 13:2. Yeah, because he went into Egypt and he pretended his wife Sarah was his sister, so the Egyptian king was into her, and he must have had a dream or something, and was revealed by God that that was someone else's wife. Get rid of her, don't go there, or else you get these plagues. So he confronted Abraham. Why did you tell me that was your wife? Why did you say it was your sister? And all this, right? And he said, oh, shoo, and he gave all his oxen, silver, etc. So he's quite wealthy. Then he went back to Egypt again. Apparently did the same thing, and he got oxen, silver, all these goodies, and got told to get lost, right? You have to get out of there. It's a quick way to get rid of somebody. Give them all this stock, the silver, etc. Say, on your way. Wow, we're wealthy as. Let's get out of here then. He needed to live where his cattle and flock could have adequate grazing area. He also needed to live near cities where he could carry on his business Both of these requirements called for a peaceful setting. The political situation in Mesopotamia at this time was rather chaotic. The invading groups permitted neither the peaceful pasturing of flocks nor the successful transaction of business. It is against this background that we must view the migrations of Abraham and of the early Hebrews. Tradition tells us that Abraham moved with his father Terah from the city of Ur in southern Mesopotamia to Haran in the northern part of the country. Some writers associate the city of Ur, however, not with southern Mesopotamia, but with a different city of Ur found in northern Mesopotamia. Others believe that Abraham's home was in the city of Haran itself. The Bible tells us that when Abraham sought a wife for his son Isaac, he sent Eliezer, his servant, to Haran, unto my country, into my kindred. Genesis 14:4. Nonetheless, the fact remains that Abraham chose to leave his childhood home and to live in the land of Canaan. Because of God's direction, he said, I'll give you this land, etc., etc. You've got to go there, pick up your stuff, your family, whatever, and off you go. It is possible that Abraham left Mesopotamia not only because of the political unrest in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, but also because of his dissatisfaction with the religious teachings of his time. The belief may have begun to develop that if the God they worshipped were truly God, he could not be pictured like a man or a woman, nor could he have human needs. The thought may have begun to grow, moreover, that only one God should be worshipped. Abraham perhaps could no longer accept the official and highly organised polytheistic and anthropomorphic teachings about the gods and goddesses of his Mesopotamian world. The Torah itself gives us one of the clearest examples of Abraham's situation. The origin of the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, Genesis 22, may be nothing less than a patriarchal protest against the sacrifice of human beings, which was practiced widely in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. Therefore, despite the superior culture of the cities of the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, it may very well have been this culture with its unacceptable religious teachings that made him want to move. They may have preferred to live in the southern as well as the hill country of central Canaan, where they could be free not only to pursue in greater peace their business as a shepherd people, but also to develop their own ideas about God. Bit hard to do that sort of thing when you're under pressure from invading hordes and all that sort of stuff, right? What the exact nature of the religion which Abraham and the other Hebrew groups practiced is not certain. Some scholars have suggested that originally in Mesopotamia, Abraham and many of the Hebrew worshipped a moon god called Sin. For example, they claim that the name of Laban, who the Torah tells us was the brother of Rebekah, comes from the same root as the Hebrew word for moon. Genesis 24:29. It is more probable that Abraham and the other Hebrew tribes, like many other peoples of the time, worshipped the gods under the name of El, and that there were many gods such as Elim, or gods. Is that supposed to be like a shortened version of Elohim? One such El was Shaddai, who was the god of the mountain. Therefore, in saying that Abraham and some of the early Hebrews chose to develop their own ideas of God, we must not assume that Abraham and his followers understood the idea of the one God as we understand it today. Some scholars tell us that the patriarchs neither had a father-son relationship nor were worshippers of the same God. They point out that not one but many families had become dissatisfied with the polytheistic and anthropomorphic religious environment of Mesopotamia. Each of these families or clans as a result began to worship its own god, generally the god of its leader or patriarch or father. Quote, fathers, unquote. This ancient practice has been called by some modern scholars practical monotheism or implicit monotheism. In time, these groups migrated to different parts of the land of Canaan, where they worshipped at the already established local shrines. The various patriarchal gods took on the names of the gods of these respective holy places. It is interesting to point out, however, that only the names of the patriarchal gods were changed in the process of the migrations. The scholars tell us that the clans continue to worship their respective gods as at the sanctuaries in Canaan in the same manner as they had previously in Mesopotamia. Later on, these same scholars tell us, even as the separate stories of the patriarchs were worked into one tradition, so the different one gods also were unified into one god. This tendency accounts for the fact that Yahweh is referred to many different names in the Torah. What seems to have been unique, however, in the relationship between the patriarchs and the one God was not necessarily the fact that God was one, but the idea that the bond between this one God and the patriarchs was in the form of an agreement called a covenant, or in Hebrew a brit. There was a personal relationship between the patriarch and his God. The patriarchs apparently treasured the covenant relationship because they believed that their respective covenants held forth for them the promise of a land inheritance and the attainment of a posterity which would become a great nation, both of which were essential for their survival as semi-nomads. Genesis 15. This relationship was guarded zealously not only by the individual but also by the family connected with this God. The God of the patriarchs was both a personal God and a patron God of the clan. The religion of the early Hebrews, however, was not free from what today is called primitive thinking. Despite any objections which the patriarchs may have had to the religions of Mesopotamia, they also had anthropomorphic aspects in their God concept. For example, the teraphim, which the Torah tells us Rachel stole from her father Laban, were nothing less than statue-like representations of his household gods. Genesis 31, 30 to 34. Even more important, however, was the fact that these statues were also the symbols of a man's right to an inheritance. I said his birthright. This meaning of the teraphim became very clear in 1919 with the discovery of a series of clay tablets in the ancient city of Nuzi in Mesopotamia. The tablets tell that if a man has no male children, he may adopt his son-in-law, who becomes the heir and receives his property and the household goods. Later, however, if a son is born, this son can inherit the family wealth, and it is he who receives the teraphim. And as a result of these discoveries, it has become quite obvious why it was of great importance for both Laban and Rachel to possess the teraphim. Laban wanted to protect any son who might be born to him. Rachel, on the other hand, wanted to protect herself and her husband Jacob in any eventuality. By possessing these teraphim, Rachel felt that both she and her husband not only would have a successful life under the protection of the God, but also would be the sole inheritors of Laban's property. At one time, the question was raised among scholars whether Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were real persons. Although no document ever has been unearthed referring specifically to these three patriarchal ancestors, the weight of archaeological evidence is such today that no one questions the fact that at least the life and times described in the Genesis stories are reliable. One of the foremost archaeological expeditions to shed light upon the historical background of patriarchs was undertaken by Dr. Nelson Glueck. During the years 1932 to 39, he made a systematic survey of southern Jordan, east and south of the Dead Sea. Today this area is a sparsely settled desert-like region. Yet the Bible tells us that when the shepherds of Abraham and Lot quarrelled and could not live together, Lot chose the regions of the Jordan River because he lifted up his eyes and beheld all the plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere. Genesis 12:10. As a result of his careful study, Dr. Glueck has shown that in the centuries before 2000 BCE, many villages were in existence in this now barren area. Moreover, his findings indicate that for some mysterious reason, the inhabitants suddenly abandoned their homes and took up their wanderings again. Dr. Glueck also has explored the Negev region of modern Israel. Although today it too is an uninhabited parched wasteland, he found abundant evidence that during the period of Abraham, hundreds of communities dotted the terrain. Several centuries later, the Negev region, like the Jordan Valley, suddenly lost its settlers and returned to a vast, empty wilderness. Since Abraham, with his large family and extensive flocks, could have prospered only in a settled area, and a settled area where he could engage in cattle business and in a land which offered fertile pasture for his herds, Dr. Glueck concludes that our exploration of the Negev and Transjordan indicate that the time of the Abraham could not have been later than the 19th century BCE. Dr. Glueck has described his exploration in Transjordan and the Negev as follows. Either the age of Abraham coincides with the period between the 21st and 19th centuries BC, or the entire saga dealing with the patriarch must be dismissed so far as its historical value is concerned from scientific consideration. We have been able to establish through archaeological exploration that that period was preceded and followed respectively both in the Negev and in Transjordan by an extended break in the history of permanent sedentary agricultural civilization. Abraham's experience in the Negev and Sinai did not occur in a vacuum. And Abraham of the 18th to the 11th centuries BC would have found the Negev to be an almost unrelievably harsh and uncultivated wasteland. His heavily laden, slowly moving and unarmed caravan would have fallen speedy prey to vulture-like nomads, nor could he have sojourned there as we are told he did, Genesis 21, without incurring the danger of being cut off and destroyed by them. The background of the biblical narrative implies, on the contrary, the existence in Negev during the age of Abraham, of villages and camps, and above all of conditions of general peace. It assumes the presence of a friendly population that received him and his retinue with hospitality and passed him on from place to place until he reached his journey's goal. It takes for granted that he found among them a common language and common customs, and in general a common way of life. We found the pottery evidence of the age of Abraham in Negev startling and exciting. At every one of the numerous settlements there, we found fragments of the easily recognizable and strikingly unique types of pottery which are characteristic of this period. The amazing uniformity of this pottery emphasizes that the Negev was then what its geography compelled it endlessly to remain, a crossroads of trade and travel between continents. The benefits that the Negev enjoyed in this respect were a mixed blessing. The same routes which opened the cultivable areas of the Negev to civilized settlement in times of peace were also the ones invariably followed periodically by invading armies. The Bible recounts a savage incursion in the time of Abraham, which extended from Syria southward through the length of Transjordan and westward through Negev to Sinai and back. Among the chief protagonists listed in Genesis 14 are Amraphel, Arioch, Chedorlaomer and Tidai, described as the kings of the east. Under the leadership of Chedorlaomer, they spread havoc wherever they went. Mentioned too are Bera, Bersha, Shinab, Shemeba, and one other whose name was not remembered. They ruled over the Dead Sea cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, and sought to shake off the servitude to Chedorlaomer and his confederates. A battle took place in the Vale of Siddim, which was full of bitumen pits, Genesis 14:10, when the might of the four was being pitted against the strength of the five, to the discomfiture of the latter. Many fell, others fled, and some were taken captive. And they took Lot, Abraham's brother's son, it was Nephi, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and they departed. Genesis 14:12. And when Abraham heard that his brother was taken captive, he let forth his trained men. Well, it's actually his nephew, so, but his brother's son. He let forth his trained men, born in his house, 318, and pursued as far as Dan, and he divided himself against them at night, he and his servants, and smote them and pursued them unto Hobath, which is on the left side of Damascus. And he brought back his brother Lot, it was Nephi Lot rather, and his goods, and the woman also, and the people. Genesis 14:14-16. The rebellion of the small kings of the cities on the east side of the Dead Sea against what must have been the extortionate rule of absentee suzerains was brutally crushed. This comparatively minor insurrection was thereupon utilised as a pretext to settle old scores and to raid and ravage with unleashed ferocity for as much booty as could possibly be won. An old order was crumbling. From southern Syria to central Sinai, their fury raged. A punitive expedition developed into an orgy of annihilation. I found that every village in their path had been plundered and left in ruins, and the countryside laid waste. The population had been wiped out or led away into captivity. For hundreds of years thereafter, the entire area was like an abandoned cemetery, hideous, unkempt, with all its monuments shattered and strewn in pieces on the ground. The sorry tale is compressed in the Bible into a few bald sentences. Genesis 14:1-7. The peaceful journeys of Abraham from Canaan to Egypt and back again emphasize the importance of the Negev as a land providing possibilities for settlement, and that of Kadesh Barnea, or Kadesh, as a well-known dwelling and camping place, and as a junction of important roads, and furthermore the connection of Abraham with them are neatly capsuled in Genesis 20 verse 1, which reads, Thereupon Abraham journeyed from thence, Zoar, of the cities of the plain, to the land of the south, the Negev, and dwelt there between Kadesh and Shur, east of the Nahal Mizraim, and he sojourned as at Gerar, Tel Abu Huraira, on the northern border of the Negev. Dr. Glueck's conclusions have been supported further by the findings of Dr. William F. Albright of Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Albright, after excavating two sites at the southern tip of the Dead Sea, concluded that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which the Bible mentions were destroyed in the days of Abraham, Genesis 19:27-28, were abandoned around the same time. Dr. Glueck believes the Jordan River Valley settlements had begun to decline. Dr. Albright also believes that the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah today lie buried beneath the shallow waters of the southern tip of the Dead Sea. Archaeological explorations have shown that the Jordan River Valley is a natural earthquake fault which with continuing disturbances not uncommon. In fact, the biblical description of the destruction of these two cities is reminiscent of a catastrophe similar to an earthquake. Genesis 19:14-28, and may explain why the Dead Sea shifted its course and covered over with its salty waters these ancient cities. While there are some scholars who disagree with Dr. Glueck's findings, contemporary thinking about the historicity of the patriarchs has been summarized in these words. We shall never be able to prove that Abraham really existed, that he did this or that, but what we can prove is that his life and times, as reflected in the stories about him, fit perfectly within the early second millennium.